Now on this channel, I often talk about and address the issue that I feel like gets ignored by the media, and of course that issue is black crime. Now this leads the uneducated, ill-informed, and downright stupid out there in the world to assume that I'm some kind of racialist, racialized supremacist, whatever they want to call me, and honestly, those people need to be sat down in the corner with the dunce cap because we're trying to have adult conversations and we can't get bogged down with their objective nonsense. But one of the reasons why I talk about black crime, and I talk about it so often on this channel, other than the fact that it's a prevalent issue that's being ignored by the media and my expertise is in criminality, and this demographic tends to commit more crimes, is the fact that when we ignore this, when we try to pretend that this is not an issue, or try to elevate, excuse, and downright advocate for criminals in the black community, the people who are disadvantaged the most are the law-abiding black Americans in this country who just want to get through their day. These people would be able to prosper almost like any other group in this country, if not for the fact that the criminal element is often protected in the name of protecting the community as a whole. I refuse to accept the framing that the black criminal is representative of the average black American. This is one of the reasons why I discuss this issue. And this leads me to cover certain things that other people who talk about these issues in a less intellectual way, in a less smart way, don't talk about. And a perfect example of this is the story today where the city of New York is actually making moves to pass legislation to forbid landlords from doing criminal background checks on their tenant. Now, to be clear, I'm not some vicious guy who wants to punish people who serve their time and are on the path to redemption forever and ever for the worst moment in their life, unless, of course, that worst moment in their life is worthy of a lifetime of condemnation, but again, those cases are few and far between. But the people being punished by these wrong-headed pieces of legislation aren't the criminals, they're the everyday law-abiding citizens, and that's what we're going to talk about on the other side of this sponsor transition. So let's throw it over to them, and then we'll bring it back over here, and I'll explain everything in such a way that you'll think it's beautiful and stunning in every possible way. Apple and other companies have a long history of restricting apps from their app store and restricting information as it's displayed on search results and in other ways, depending on if you're using their software. This is one of the reasons why I highly recommend that you get a VPN, and the absolute best VPN, the VPN of this channel, is Virtual Shield. If you go over to virtualshield.com/justice, you can experience the freedom of a strict no-log VPN that's one of the top in the industry, and guess what? You can try it for free for 30 days, and there's a discount right now available to members of my audience of 73% off, and that 73% will hold for the length of your time with Virtual Shield. You can't afford to miss this deal. Go over to virtualshield.com/justice and try it out for yourself.
When it comes to new tenants, do landlords have the right to check their criminal record? That is the question at the heart of a new proposed act. Later this morning, a rally being held in support of that bill over at City Hall.
So first and foremost, the first thing that I have to address is the absurdity of the question, is the absurdity of the framing of this issue, which is whether or not a landlord, aka a property owner in the United States of America, a place where we're supposed to value private property rights, has the right to know things about their tenant before they move in. This is ridiculous. Of course, you should have the right to be able to do your due diligence, do your checkups, and figure out what's up with the people who intend to live on your property. And this isn't just for the protection of your investment, although that is a good enough reason on its own, but it's also for the protection of the tenants in your building. You should be able to do these checks. This shouldn't be a debate. This shouldn't be a discussion. Obviously, the reason why landlords do these checks is because they have value. They're not free to do, and they use that in order to protect their tenants and, again, protect their investment. So already the framing of the question is ridiculous. Also, they're talking about a rally in support of this that has not happened. It's scheduled for tomorrow because it's artificial support by the members of the city council who are pushing this. So from the jump, I hate the framing of this story. I hate the artificial boost of support for people on this issue. And I hate the entire concept that members of a city council can pass rules and regulations in order to force you, the property owner, to take more risk because they think it's a feel-good piece of legislation. Also, I hate that low lower third. I hate that chyron. I hate what they call these bills. It's so Orwellian. It just makes me angry. Rally against the Fair Chance Housing Act. So first and foremost, I just want to point out that they said that there's going to be a rally the next day in support of this, but the chyron says it's a rally against it. And I also want to point out that it is not a Fair Chance Housing Act. A Fair Chance Housing Act is for you, the law-abiding citizen, to get preferential treatment because you didn't violate the rules of our society. It is not fair to lump you in with all the criminals, thus making it more difficult for the landlord to discern between the two of you. And if you're already living there, it is not fair for you to have gone through a background check, for you to have been screened, all to end up living near a felon, especially if you're trying to move out of one of these bad neighborhoods. On top of that, the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, is the biggest landlord in the country. And in order to be compliant with federal laws, in order to get federal funding, they do background checks and they screen out people who are convicted of crimes from public housing. So you, the landlord, can't do that. You can't secure your own premises, but New York City's housing authority can kick you out if you sold some drugs 20 years ago. Does that sound fair? Does that sound sensible? Does that sound reasonable? No, it's absurd, and this whole proposal is absurd.
Just after the rally, City Council's Committee on Civil and Human Rights will hold a hearing on the act at 10 this morning. The act would stop landlords or real estate brokers from doing criminal background checks on prospective tenants, with some exceptions. They include the sex offender registry, and landlords of two-family homes or rooms of owner-occupied housing are allowed to look up a tenant's criminal history. If passed, landlords would not have to answer for any criminal acts done by their tenants.
So I just want to point out that I could understand why some larger rental groups, why some landlords would actually be in favor of the removing of the background check requirement, and that is that last attachment right there, because in the city of New York, somehow we live in such a ridiculous time that you, the landlord, are actually responsible for the criminal actions of your tenants in some way, shape, or form, which just makes me think that maybe you should get rid of that portion, because that's probably the reason why landlords are not renting to felons, if that's your goal. But of course, if you're a landlord, if you're any kind of business owner or businessman, small or large, the city of New York just looks for ways to extract money for you, and one of those ways apparently was to make you liable for the people's actions in your apartment because you should have screened them out, thus meaning all they have to do is pass half this piece of legislation to get that goal to be forwarded instead of the whole thing. So just remove that liability unless there's absurd negligence and you should be fine. Maybe assign some responsibility to the criminals for their own actions. God forbid we have that sensible policy in the city of New York. But no, they're going to go one step further and try to prevent any screening, basically making some kind of devil's bargain with the big landlords in the city of New York.
City Council member Keith Powers says 750,000 people in the city have a criminal record, and this bill gives them a fresh start.
When they walk in to try to rent an apartment, there is a barrier in their way. No matter whether they have rehabilitated themselves, no matter whether they've gotten a good job, no matter if they have a family, they're being told that they can't get an apartment.
Well, the reason why they're being told that they can't get an apartment is because you made the landlords liable for their actions. Just remove that liability and that problem will be solved.
In a very hyper-competitive market for housing, we want to find always a good landing spot to make sure we find a balance between public safety and addressing the housing crisis. But what's really clear right now is background checks are not being used effectively. You
know, one of the things I absolutely hate about the left, one of the things I absolutely hate about the Democrats is they pretend that they're this party of science. They're the party of reason and data and studies, and they need to break out the studies in order to prove out their policy positions to be 100% A-OK, A+, first class all the way, and accurate. Well, the thing is, the studies are in when it comes to ban the box. The studies are in when it comes to prohibiting people from screening out potentially criminal people, and guess what we find out when this is done? Time after time when this is done in job applications, you know who suffers the most? Black applicants, Hispanic applicants, people that are known because of the statistics to be more criminal according to the statistics, get screened out because you can no longer individualize these cases. So the result of this kind of legislation is more discrimination. Yet this guy is presenting it like, wow, it's a fresh start. I'm going to call it the Fair Chance Housing Act, and that will solve all the problems because remember, it says fair chance in the name. Now, does it actually give a fair chance? No. no, does it actually end up incentivizing discrimination against non-criminal minorities? Yes, because what we know is that when you take away people's ability to get individual information on people, they substitute group statistics for that individual information. Think about it like this. I'm sure you've heard the tale of black people not being able to get cabs, specifically black men not being able to get cabs in major cities. Everybody's talked about it, stand-up comedy, all about it. Well, did you know that when Uber actually first came into being, we actually saw black people able to get cabs way more because of Uber? Why was that the case? Well, there's actually a number of reasons. First and foremost, major metropolitan areas actually artificially restrict the number of cabs that can be on the road. In fact, the city of New York had the same amount of cabs, actually less cabs under the medallion system than when it was originally instituted way back in the 1930s, despite the fact that the population of New York City went up. So you have artificially high demand for cabs, which allows cab drivers to be more selective. Secondarily, if you are in a situation where, let's say, you're afraid of being robbed by an anonymous person, then you see somebody out on the streets and they're a young black male versus seeing somebody else out on the streets and they're an elderly Asian woman, then statistically in your brain, even if you don't know anything about the young black male or the elderly Asian woman, on average, the elderly Asian woman is going to be safer. But the thing is, Uber actually has an individual rating system. So if you're going to pick somebody up in an Uber and the young black male has a 5-star rating, all good commentary and all that, and is a great passenger, as compared to the old Asian lady who actually happens to be a crazy person who hits you with your umbrella, then you will use that individual information over the group statistics and pick up the young black male. Now you might be saying, Sean, this doesn't work in housing, but the thing is, you would only be saying that because you're incredibly stupid, because we've actually seen this in housing. Way back when, before all the housing regulations were instituted in the city of New York, which, by the way, were post-World War II creations, we actually saw a pact of racists in the white neighborhood of Harlem in order to prevent black people from buying into Harlem or renting into Harlem. All of these guys got together and they said they were going to refuse to rent to black tenants in the early part of the 20th century, and guess what happened? Most of you don't even realize that Harlem used to be an exclusively all-white neighborhood. It's transitioned from an all-white neighborhood to a black neighborhood to a largely Hispanic neighborhood over the course of time, because what ended up happening was there was so much demand for space, you would have to pay the cost of discrimination if you were white landlords in Harlem by not renting or not selling to the black people who wanted to move in there. Now, just as the medallion system, which was instituted around the 30s, artificially limited the amount of cabs that were on the road, thus allowing the cost of discrimination to be reflected onto the patrons, we're seeing the same exact thing in housing due to the fact that we have overwhelming, insane housing regulations. Now, you could say with discrimination laws, the cost of discrimination is paid by the landlords or the people doing the discriminating, but we've seen that is just not the case. Most of these discrimination suits are settled with fines to the government, and there's never any actual compensation for the people who are allegedly discriminated against. Not to mention that a bunch of these cases are fraudulent and ridiculous and absurd. And again, when you have so many prospective tenants and you have all these limitations on buildings, just like in the cab situation, that advantages established landlords, but now you're going one step further and you're removing their ability to have individualized information. So what you're going to see is them default back to group statistics, which will ultimately lead to more racial discrimination.
It's really clear right now is background checks are not being used effectively, and we are denying too many people housing on the basis of a mistake in their past.
This is the exact kind of nanny-stating nonsense that I absolutely hate. Who the hell is this person to say that background checks aren't being utilized effectively? If you want to rent out your property to a bunch of criminals, then be my guest, go do that, go provide that service yourself. But the idea that because you won a city council election, and by the way, these are off-year elections that very few people actually vote in, that you somehow have the right to dictate how people should manage their own properties is absurd. On top of that, as we already discussed, you put liability, or at least the city of New York put liability for criminal behavior onto the landlords. You should just remove that, and then people would be more willing to assume risk when it comes to certain tenants. And again, if you think the principle is so sound, why are you exempting people who live in two-family homes where the owner is occupying one of the units, or people who rent out their rooms? If it's good for the goose, it should be good for the gander. If you don't have a right as a landlord, as somebody who's using your property to make income, maybe as a nest egg, to rent out to whoever you see fit, to screen out for criminals, why do small landlords have that right?
A mistake in their past.
I thought it was one little mistake in their past. Again, what we're seeing here is this person's utter disdain for people who provide goods and services to people in the marketplace on a large scale. If he actually believed that these were one little itty-bitty mistakes, he would be renting out his rooms to criminals. He wouldn't be exempting small mom-and-pop two-family home owning people.
The act is also facing some criticism, especially from landlords and community advocates.
It's a reckless bill, basically, that is going to disproportionately affect the Black and Latino neighborhoods.
Yes, 100%. This woman is on point. She is correct. The people who are specifically going to be negatively impacted by this are people who live in Black and Latino areas, are people who live in those buildings, and prospective Black and Latino tenants themselves, because there will be no way to discern from the group statistics to individualized circumstances. So everything she said about this is 100% correct. It is reckless, it is absurd, and the brunt of it is going to be felt by those communities. And I know we're always used to people saying this and it being disingenuous and it being inaccurate, but I assure you, in this case, based on the precedent from other types of ban the box initiatives, this is exactly correct. This is exactly what happens.
It's a very scary time in New York. For those of us who've lived in the city our whole lives, we really want to make sure we're safe in our homes, we're safe going in and out of our homes.
We're going to push out the working and middle class out of New York City, because this is like the last nail in the coffin. I mean, if we can't provide safety and know who's living next door to us and be in fear in our own homes, then it's over. It's game over.
True. 100% true. Every New Yorker, every age group, every demographic that they interviewed in this CW segment, guess what? 100% accurate, 100% dead on. Respect from me to you. I thought there was going to be a rally in support of this bill, but it seems like everybody came out against, and they couldn't even find that one dumb person who was like, well, actually, I'm in favor of this, I support this, I'm on board for this, and then they ask them where they live, and they find out that they live in the wealthiest part of Long Island, and they actually never even come into the city, except for now, in this moment, to observe the poors gathering in a herd. Now look, as I said early on, I think there's something to be said for somebody who actually legitimately made a mistake in their past and has redeemed themselves. And I don't think that you should be denied an apartment in perpetuity, again, depending on the crime that you committed. And even if that crime was a violent crime, depending on how far away, what steps you've taken to redeem yourself, I can understand the fact that you would be upset if you were denied an apartment. But this is one of the reasons why I'm actually on board for half of this piece of legislation, because part of the reason why they're denying you that access to the apartment is because of the liability issue. So while I do think we should all actually agree on that portion of the bill, I am not willing to take this package deal, this poison pill, in order to get that done, because the people who do not deserve to be discriminated against, the people who did nothing wrong, the people who are going to face the consequences the most, are the law-abiding Black and Hispanic citizens of New York. Because again, when people don't have individual information, they tend to go based on generalized group statistics. Our goal as a society should be to disincentivize discrimination by providing more information, not limiting information based on wrong-headed methods that have been proven not to work. I don't like the idea that people who are Black, who are doing everything right in this city, should be lumped in with the worst element of their community, because in reality, they are not the worst element of their community, just like the worst element of the white community isn't representative of white people, of Asian people isn't representative of Asian people, and so on and so on. But hey, look, those are just my thoughts. Maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you have a compelling argument for this policy, even though I think it's failed before and will likely fail again. And if so, let me know down in the comments below. If you like this video, then you could show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. You can follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about a wrong-headed ban the box policy, and how it will lead to discrimination against minorities. Till next time.